Hello everyone, thank you for being here. This is Goose Auto Works, and this is what we're doing today. Okay, so a few quick things to note before we get started. Firstly, I'm going to be following pretty closely a write-up that was done on this subject for the making of this video, and I will link that in the description so you can refer to it as well. Second, I would highly recommend buying an entire Expedition seat if you are able to, whether that's from eBay or a local pick and pull place if you've got it. Reason being, the brackets that you're going to need have been discontinued by Ford. And so if you're able to get an entire seat that has those, that's great because you're going to already need the seat pan anyway, and then also the seat belt you can reuse from the Expedition as well. You can modify and reuse the seat belt that is attached to your bench seat, but it just saves you a little bit of time, looks a little bit cleaner if you can go ahead and score one along with that Expedition seat. So if you're able to do that, that's what I would do. With all that out of the way, let's get into the video. So this is the center console I will be using for the conversion, and here are the door panels that I'm going to be painting as well. You may recognize them from my power window conversion video. But I'm going to paint this to match with that. So I'm thinking to do the whole body in the dark graphite, which is this color right here. And then what is dark graphite now, do in black to match the door panels, as well as the top lid here, and then the two side pockets. I'm going to do those in black as well. And it looks like for this middle area, I can just take a couple of torque screws out and just be able to pull that middle piece out. So that's going to save me some masking to do. So I'm going to go ahead and try to do that and go ahead and get this painted up. With your seats completely out, you can go ahead and start making modifications to mount your brackets for the center console. As you can see, my truck is completely empty. You do not have to do that. The only reason mine's like this is I'm installing brand new carpet. So I pulled everything out, but I will show you where and how you need to cut your carpet to allow for these brackets to mount up. But first, in the front, this hole is already tapped. This one is not. That needs to be tapped to a 10 by 1.5 millimeter hole. And in the rear, this one needs to be tapped to a 12 by 1.75 millimeter hole. These two are already tapped. We just need to tap these to match. And you may or may not have rubber grommets that are installed in there. If you do, just pull those out first. In my case, they're already empty, so I just need to tap them and move on. And for the brackets, this is how they will mount up. So just make a note of this orientation, and that's how they're going to be installed, and then your center console will just go over that. So let's go ahead and get these holes tapped and we can move forward. Hey, remember that time I told you to make note of the orientation of those brackets? Well, that was wrong. So the front bracket's good. The rear bracket needed to be flipped 180 degrees of how I just showed you, as evidenced by the little scrap piece of carpet that I put in there. Now this would have gotten covered by the center console anyway, I'm pretty sure, but this will just help with padding and help to kind of disguise anything that may not have been covered. With those holes tapped, and after you've double checked the bolt to make sure that it goes in okay, the next thing we need to do is right under here. So the bench seat, it connected right here, but that's going to be used now for our center console. So for the passenger seat, the next hole is going to be under this, and that is something else we'll need to tap for the bracket to be able to fully bolt down that seat. Now it's going to be really difficult to find under the carpet. You could potentially feel around, and maybe you're lucky enough to be able to feel where it is and to go after it that way. But for this section, you might want to just pull up this section of the carpet just till you can get to here and make it a little bit easier on yourself. So I'm going to peel this off, go ahead and tap where that hole needs to be, and we'll go on to the next step after that. So something to know before you go, this one right here, my tap was just barely too long, and so you can see on the transmission tunnel here where it kind of scratched it a little bit. So what I did was I was able to get it started enough, and then I just put the tap back in use this tiny little 6mm wrench and finish it off the rest of the way. I know that's not ideal, but if you go slow and be consistent, you should be okay, and this bolt threads in just fine, so I think I'm gonna be okay. But just a little FYI for you guys, something to keep in mind so you're not stuck. But these bolts here were just already with this center console whenever I bought it. These up here, they're going to be that 10 by 1.5mm thread I mentioned, and they're 25mm long, and I threw a little lock washer on there to help keep them secure. You don't really have to crank down on this super hard. Obviously make sure it's not going to go anywhere, but it's just holding in your center console, so it's not a big deal. As you can see, the carpet is in, so the next thing is to actually install the center console, and I'll show you on there. But basically how it's going to work is on the underside of the console there are built-in brackets. The rear one has two little prongs that will kind of slide in here, locking going forward, and then you'll secure it on the side pieces. On the front bracket of the console has a little lip, a little tag on it with a hole or a slot cut in it that will latch on right here to this little piece, and then you will secure it with two screws coming down through the console to lock it in here, and I'll show you what that looks like on the bottom side of the console. So here's the console flipped over. As I mentioned, here's that rear bracket that should be attached on here already, and so these are just going to slide in there, and then there's these little keyway holes on the sides, and that's where you're going to attach it to the side pieces of that floor bracket. And then here's that little prong piece I mentioned and the little slot that's cut in it, so that's just going to come over, latch down, and then you'll come from the top side and secure those screws to the floor bracket. And you can use a piece of tape to make holding that screw a little easier. Center console is in, fully installed. A little bit tricky, so let me show you how I did it. First, it's going to be a little easier on you if you remove this back piece here. It's just going to gain you more room between the brackets and this back shelf here. So to do that, you'll have to take the lid off first. Now, I put a little assembly lube on here just to grease this hinge up, so ignore that. But there's going to be 4 screws here to remove the lid, and then that's going to gain you access to these little T15 fasteners that are on either side. Now those are going to be the same size as the fastener here and the one that's in the middle up here, holding this main middle area down. Once you've got that off, like I said, it just gives you a little bit more room to work. And what my main problem was if you recall, I had this bracket on backwards the first time. So after I flipped it around, I didn't initially cut more carpet out. I went ahead and did that so it could sit a little more flush against the floor, and that helped a lot. But then also I put some of that same assembly lube on both halves of that bracket, because what was happening was this was getting so far and then just getting hung up and stuck, and the whole thing's plastic, so I didn't want to push too hard on anything, break anything. And so after I did that, it went on a whole lot easier, and you'll know whenever it's on because your keyways on either side and then the 2 bolt holes up front are going to line up perfect. After you do that and get those installed, just put your little finishing trim on there, and next you are ready for your seats. So let's jump into that. Now with our seat back removed, the next thing we need to do is turn our attention to our Expedition donor seat. And we're not going to use it just like it is. Biggest reason is going to be the side bolstering here on the leg is different than what's on the bench style. So if you see here, this comes out a lot further than it does over here. At least on this one, I don't know if there's different Expedition seats that have different trim levels that might come a little more like this, but here we're gonna have to scrap it, but that's okay. The foam that's on here is just glued on, so it comes off pretty easily, and then we'll be able to use this as a template for where to cut on this seat. Now we do need to undo the rails that are under here because this is kind of sandwiched in between, but again, that's not a huge deal. So I'll jump into that, and then we'll get this bench stripped down, and then we'll start making our cuts. time for a quick tour of the carnage. So here is our skeletonized expedition seat. So these are all the bits we're going to want to keep. That's the pan, the brackets, the seat belt too. We're going to want to hold on to that because that will come in handy later. And then here is the factory bench pan. And so you will need to take your center console off to be able to get the foam and the covers off, as well as these side brackets. So it's going to be similar as with the expedition seat. You're going to need to loosen that up to be able to pull those off. I pulled the covers off completely because I am recovering these, but the good news is if you are not having to do that, this middle section here has no hog ring clips or anything like that keeping that fabric down. So you should just be able to peel it loose, make your cut, fold it back over, and then be done. As far as where to make that cut, if we overlay this expedition foam on top, we'll see that basically right where this indentation is where we're going to need to make that cut. And then if we carry that up to the top, we'll just kind of keep going through, cut right here, and then cut this little middle section out. And just another comparison of what that bolstering looks like. Here we can see how much further it comes out compared to the expedition seat. And on top of that, again, like I said, this is going to be hog ringed in, so unless you're having to replace that anyway, it's just a lot of saved steps. So this is definitely the way you're going to want to do it, and then we'll just transfer this over to our expedition seat pan. Okay, so it is a new day and it's pretty nasty outside, but let me go ahead and show you what I've been up to in the meantime. Alright, so since we last left off, I have recovered the passenger seat back. That's what that is, and it is ready to meet the passenger seat bottom. So this is going to be what I cut from my center bench seat, and I actually just used a bread knife on this and it worked really well. So that's what I would recommend. And it is sitting on top of, once you break it down, the passenger seat pan. Now you do need to break it down to this state, taking off of the floor brackets, the slider brackets, because if you'll have noticed from your factory pan, the seat cover is going to be sandwiched on the sides here between the pan and the slider brackets. So you will need to take it down to this state to be able to tuck everything underneath. So I'm going to put this back on here, and I am going to start getting the cover test fitted and see where exactly I need to cut, what I need to remove, where I need to tuck everything over, and get all that figured out. So I'll jump back in with you guys here in just a minute and show you that. It is yet another day, but it feels great outside. Got my seat, got my Clean Cause Energy, link and discount code in the description. Half of all profits go toward drug and alcohol addiction recovery. As far as the seat goes, let me flip this over, show you how I did everything, and we'll talk about it. Okay, so as far as the clips to go to the pan in the front and in the back, I had to trim them down. They were a little bit too long to actually fit onto this seat pan. So you can just see that I lined it up and kind of cut those out. Trying to leave as much of the material as I could. This was a little bit loose as far as stretching this and fitting it over, so I supplemented that with some foam cushioning that I got from Hobby Lobby, and I can show you that in the description as well. But that just helped to add some thickness here to pull this a little tighter. Also, whoever had these seat covers before me trimmed these side pieces off, and so I had to take some of what I had removed from other areas and staple them on to be able to fold those sides over. But as of right now, it's pretty solid. It's not going anywhere. And for the tough part, what I did with all the excess material, let me flip this over again and we will dissect that a little bit. So looking from this side, not too bad, nothing too conspicuous. Basically what I did was any of that excess material that covered that center bench, I just folded it over. So I segmented it, kind of pie cut it to where it could fold over without getting completely wrinkled up. And it's not crazy pretty, and it is stapled and glued down, as well as having that retaining clip on the bottom. But as I mentioned, you know, from this side you really can't see it too much. And when doing just a quick test fit inside the truck, you really can't tell too much. unless you just come right up over it and peer down, in which case, yeah, you can see it. But for what I'm using this truck for the length of time that I'll still have it, this works just fine for me. And I think once everything gets swapped out and fully buttoned down, cleaned up and all that, it will look pretty good. Is this a good job? No. Is it a bad job? Maybe. But like I said, for me and for what I'm doing, this works fine. At least you get to see it. You get to see how this turned out. You can, make modifications from there. But again, for what I am wanting to do, I think that this will end up being just fine. At this point, I'm just going to trim and clean things up a little bit. I'm going to add any of the little finishing trim pieces and things like that back onto the seat, get it fully reassembled back in the truck, and then I will swap the seat covers for the driver's seat off camera. But whenever I come back, everything will be all put together and we'll see what we think. Alright everybody, so that's going to do it for this video. I do hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you in the next one.